In this movie, I'll show you how to use the gradient tool along with the gradient annotator in order to modify gradients directly inside the document window. All right, so this time around, we're going to be working on the eye. And so I'll go up to the object menu and choose Show All, or press Control-Alt-3 or Command-Option-3 on the Mac. And then I'll shift-click on this oval right there to deselect it, and I'll return to the object menu, choose Hide, and choose Selection, or press Control-3 or Command-3 on the Mac in order to hide the other path outlines. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on the eye, and I'll press Control-Y or Command-Y on the Mac to switch to the outline mode so that we can lift these shades of brown using, of course, the eyedropper tool, which you can get either by selecting it near the bottom of the toolbox, or you can just press the I key. All right, I'm going to start off by clicking on this dark shade of brown around the perimeter of the eye. And then I'll go over here to the swatches panel. I'll click on a little page icon at the bottom of the panel. I'll name this guy Brown 1 and turn on the global checkbox. And I'll just go ahead and finesse the HSB values right away here. I'll take the hue value down to 20, and then I'll crank the saturation value up to 100%, and I'll take the brightness value down to 30%, and then I'll click OK. All right, now you want to click in this sort of murky shade of brown near the top of the eye, and then having lifted that color, click once again on the little page icon at the bottom of the swatches panel, call this guy Brown 2, turn on the global checkbox just in case you want to make changes later, switch over to HSB, tab to the hue value and set it at 30%, so we're pretty close right now. I'll set the saturation value to 80%, and I'll take the brightness value slightly down to 40%, and then I'll click OK. And then finally, you want to click someplace toward the center of the eye to lift the lightest shade of brown. Click on a little page icon at the bottom of the swatches panel, call this guy Brown 3, turn on a global checkbox, switch to HSB, go ahead and tab to the hue value, which should be 30. We're awfully close this time. I want a saturation value of 85%, and I'm looking for a brightness value of 60%, after which point I will once again click OK. All right, now I'm going to shift-click here inside the swatches panel so that I've selected all three shades of brown, and I'll go ahead and drag them and drop them into the emoji group. All right, now go ahead and press Control-Y or Command-Y in the Mac to switch back to the preview mode. Press the V key to grab the black arrow tool and go ahead and click on that path to select it. Now, we most certainly don't want a stroke, so I'll go ahead and click on the second color swatch up here in the control panel, and I'll set it to none. I do, however, want a gradient fill. So move over to the gradient panel, make sure the fill is active, and then click the down pointing arrowhead, and once again click white black in order to apply the default gradient. All right, now go ahead and drag the Brown 1 swatch and drop it onto the black color stop over here on the right-hand side of the slider. Then grab Brown 3 and drop it on the white color stop, and then you can grab Brown 2 and drop it someplace in between in order to add a new color stop. Now, for whatever reason, that new color stop has come in with an opacity value of 10%. I don't want that, so I'll go ahead and crank the value up to 100%, and then I'll tab to the location value and set it to 90%. I also want to take this color stop, the first one, and set its location to 50% in order to create this effect here. All right, now that we have a gradient to work with, let's see how we can modify the fill using the gradient tool, which is located right here above the eyedropper. And notice that it has a very easy to remember keyboard shortcut of G for gradient. Once you select that tool, you're going to see the gradient annotator here inside the document window. If you don't see the annotator, which is this white bar that lights up as soon as you hover over it, then go up to the View menu and choose this command, which will appear as Show Gradient Annotator. In any event, I'm going to go ahead and escape out. And I want you to see what we have to work with. First of all, you can change the length of the gradient by dragging this square right here, the square end. If you drag the round end, then you're going to move the gradient inside the shape. Then you're going to move the gradient inside the shape. Another option is to just drag inside the shape in order to draw a new gradient annotator like so. And the circle is going to represent the beginning of the gradient. The square is going to represent the end. Notice that when you hover over the gradient, you can also see the color stops. And if you double click on one of those stops, then you can select a color. And so I could switch to a different swatch if I wanted to by clicking on the swatches icon and then selecting a different swatch from the list. Of course, I want to leave it set to Brown 2, so I'll go ahead and switch it back. You can also modify the opacity and the location as you like. after which point just press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac to accept your change. If you want to change the angle of the gradient, then go ahead and move your cursor just beyond the square, like so, and then drag around inside the document window. Now, the reason we're seeing that dashed marquee is that it helps you figure out the length of the gradient with respect to the shape. But as soon as you release, the annotator is going to switch back to that parallel location there. And that's because when you're working with a linear gradient, as we are, you can see type is set to linear here inside the gradient panel, then your gradient annotator always has to run down the center of the shape because, after all, the gradient has one and only one dimension. It runs in a single direction and nothing more, which means it runs the same down the center of the shape as it does above and below the annotator. And so my last bit of advice is that if you end up making kind of a mess of things by dragging this guy out to a weird location, and you generally lose access to the annotator, as I've done here, then just go ahead and drag inside the shape once again in order to draw a new one. And then finally, you can constrain the angle of your gradient to vertical, diagonal, or horizontal by pressing and holding the Shift key, which you can do while drawing a new gradient annotator as well. And that's how you work with the gradient tool as well as the gradient annotator, both of which allow you to modify a gradient directly inside the document window here inside Illustrator.